video, I want to discuss the colorful nature of a term that I've instantiated, but not just instantiated, I've well defined and included in various of my writings, and will be publishing on my upcoming book that is more concerned with how we consume both knowledge and also relate to food, and how our psychological relations to food in particular actually tend to be something that impacts our psychological sustainability more meaningfully than sometimes even the foods that we consume, and pertains to our nutritional consciousness and our food consciousness and how we go about weighing certain aspects of what we put into our bodies and how that impacts our psychological and physical health and well-being, and particularly the mind-body connection. And this psychological construct that I've instantiated is something called characterization. And you've probably heard of characterization before, but I'm using it in a way that regards psychological processes, in which has not been ever originally even written down in any philosophizing and theoretical manner. And characterizations are very, very meaningful in regards to how we go about thinking about things visually. And if you think about, for example, what a character is, it's a direct modeling from our direct perceptions drawn out from our prior inputs, direct sensory inputs from sensors to our precepts of the self, that meaningfully interpret and create meanings as we think it, and that are sought up in regards to our visual thinkings, that are looking upwards towards how we can go about modeling a concept that is not necessarily, say, objective, but we know is coming from a subjective place, because we're trying to engage in a learning process, a meaningful learning process that allows us to instantiate our own meanings and develop our own subjectively true knowledge, in particular in regards to subjective truths that we develop in a learning process, in which we can create these sort of cartoonish images and capture in various manners of ways the characteristic qualities and the specific properties that can be visually drawn out from our direct perceptions through our actions and behaviors, and output onto a page, say with a pencil filled with graphite, and drawn and sketched the images with, say, big eyes and dots and a cartoonish nose of what somebody looks like, that if you were to look at it, it's like, oh, that person actually really does look like that individual, and you've made a really good caricature out of them. And a characterization is a manner of how we go about well-defining our own meaningful interpretations of anything, potentially, any subject matter and any substance, any material substance, that we form these subjective-objective relations directly through more of an artistic process, but also engages more of this deep love of learning that allows us to deepen the categoricals as we start to engage in characterizing more meaningfully. And when it comes to food relations, characterization is very, very important, because the most difficult perception, and you might actually think that this is more of a sense, but it's not, and I want you to think more about this, but taste is something that we actually have to spend a lot more agency in regards to being able to direct meaningful information to try to meaningfully interpret. And we tend to characterize it because we don't have the right well-defined categories to associate through characteristics and characteristic qualities. So we have to engage much more in a subjective process, and a subjective process that's trying to develop subjective knowledge and subjective truth through the best manner in which we can characterize it. And we often draw from what's familiar and which tends to have similar aspects that we can put together in novel and creative ways that draw on this creating and meaning process. And that's all I wanted to say for this video. I'm going to be talking much more in depth about this and in various ways, because characterizations tend to actually, they begin as a visual thinking process and a creative visually thinking process that begins with our aspirations rather than inspiration. It's very internally driven, and this requires us to engage the subject to the object from our introspective internalizations that are intrinsic to our thinkings and couldn't be otherwise tethered to the connectives and communicatives output from meaningful, thoughtful utterances that can be influenced through, and must be actually caused by, our direct perceptions, but has multiple manners of constituency in which we can engage various perception, action, and behavior apparatuses in conjunction with the behaviors that we can output in the environment, such as drawing, or even doing something like an animated voice, in which we tend to capture various different meaningful emotions, and we can bring out to life certain aspects of our imagination that are made more realistically psychological, true, and validated through our direct perceptions and actions and behaviors that are so awesome and that energize us and break the expectations of others because they're unique and they couldn't otherwise exist and they're original to our conjurings. And insofar as we can form more objective, subjective-objective truth relations that are more ultimately psychologically true in regards to ultimate psychological truth, bound to the capacity to artistically piece together meaningful emotions in regards to thinking processes that are creative and that require a lot of emotional regulation, rather than actually, say, impulsively engaging our meaningful emotions. It's about being able to channel that in a particular directed meaningful information pathway that allows us to engage meaningfully in not just an artistic process, but at the highest level of cognitive order and emotional, higher order cognition and emotional processes. It involves engaging what's a masterful, not just learning, but knowledge process in which we can instantiate what are more objectively true communicatives of meaningful information that relate directly to the self and that convey certain truths about existence that are proximate to the boundness and near the situatedness of our existence, and draw from the far off existing materials and substances that we can piece together and form stronger subjective-objective relationships that constitute these cause and effect relationships, in which we can communicate on a wide variety of pretty much any subject matter, in which we can create a world of our imagination, much as computational modeling can create highly realistic imagery, and actually imagery that's near exact and sometimes captures elements that we can't necessarily see through the naked eye, through modeling what's in the surrounds in a more well-defined and the highest well-defined resolution, in which we are engaging what must be, as the good enough and necessary conditions, a creative process.